We weren't supposed to be here, were we, Capitals fans? We weren't supposed to be talking about the Washington Capitals and their exit from the playoffs this early. For the Washington Capitals, this year was a challenge because you do have to fight that Stanley Cup hangover, and they definitely had that to start the season. It did feel like they were having a hard time getting back into it. Not as much as Pittsburgh the year before, but it was still there at points this year. And when you've played so much hockey the year before, it can be hard to do it again the year after. Now, I'm going to go all the way back to the last year they missed the playoffs, when Adam Oates was the coach. They had 90 points that year, 38, 30, and 14 record. They were 11th in goals for, 22nd in goals against. Those are surprisingly poor numbers for a team coached by Adam Oates. And they missed the playoffs, and Adam Oates was gone. Which, of course, I always thought that's too bad, because Adam Oates was one of my favorite hockey players when he played, and I thought it was kind of sad that he didn't last longer as a coach. Barry Trotz then comes in, and the seasons of 100 points begin. 45, 26, and 11 record, 101 points. They were 6th in offense and 6th in goals against, so 6 in each. And they finished with a second-round exit against the New York Rangers. And this was the whole storyline with the Washington Capitals since inception, basically, is getting over that hump in the playoffs. And it wasn't helped in 2016 when they finished 56, 18, and 8. 120 points. Second in goals for, second in goals against, and they're out in the second round against Pittsburgh. That also didn't help that Pittsburgh, being their arch rival of forever, they just couldn't get over the hump against them in the playoffs. So they go into the next season, they finish 55, 19, and 8, almost an identical record to the year before. 118 points, still Barry Trotz, of course, third in goals for and first in goals against, and they lose in the second round to Pittsburgh. So this is a team that defensively gets much better under Barry Trotz, and offensively pretty darn solid under Barry Trotz. And this is not completely out of line with what he brought to the New York Islanders this year, right? Because the Islanders moved from 31st to 1st in goals against. Goals for moved up, not as much, but hey, he had Ovechkin here, so that definitely helps with your goals for. Now, last year, of course, they finished 49, 26, and 7, 105 points. Regular season-wise, the poorest season they'd had of the three, and you know, it's their second worst out of the four, if you include this one as well. They're 9th in goals for and 15th in goals against. Well, their record, they're nowhere near as good, and of course they win the Stanley Cup, because that's kind of the way things work these days. When you least suspect it, Stanley Cup takes place. And whoever wins the Stanley Cup this year is going to be a team that a few months ago we weren't talking about as a favorite. And I know there are going to be people who say, well, San Jose was. No, they were not considered a favorite at certain points this year, especially towards the end of the season. So Barry Trotz walks in the offseason, and that becomes a major storyline, but Todd Reirden takes over, and the regular season results are virtually identical to the year before, 48, 26, and 8 for 104 points. So they had one less regulation or overtime win, and they had one more overtime or shootout loss. That's it. That's the differential during the season. Goals for got better. They went from 9th to 5th. Goals against dropped from 15th to 17th. But hey, they won the cup with the 15th rated defense going into the playoffs. And then they lose in the first round to Carolina in 7. And of course, the thing that hurts about them losing in 7 this year is that they were up 3-2. And they had full control and they lost it. And once they lost Game 6, Carolina understood what their job was, and they went to it in Game 7. Now, for next year, they're not in cap hell. You would think that a team that's this well off, that we've talked about cap hell with them before in previous seasons, they're not really there now. $72.7 million spent for next year of $83 million. Now, Ovechkin signed for $9.54 million for 2 more years. Nick Backstrom is up next summer. Now, he makes $6.7 million right now, and it's questionable how much he's going to be worth, because his stats are still excellent, but you get that feeling that he's at the age where it could start to fall off a bit, and if you're negotiating with him, you've got to look at the long term, and you've got to look at the future of this team, right? Niskanen's at $5.75 million until 2021. Those are your in the next couple of years guys. Niskanen is a guy who I think might end up being on the trade block this offseason. And then in the background, you got Braden Holtby, who next summer is UFA, and he is signed at $6.1 million for this upcoming season. So, is he likely to get a raise? Yeah, probably. I would think with that Stanley Cup resume with Vezina Trophy, you know what I mean. He's probably going to get a raise next summer. So you do have to kind of look to next summer with Backstrom and Holtby, and then the year after with Ovechkin, trusting that Ovechkin 2 years from now isn't going to say, "I've done all I can do. I'm good." Unrestricted free agents this summer. Carl Hagelin, who looked pretty good for the Washington Capitals. If he wants to stay, they can find cap space for him. Connolly might be a little bit trickier. Connolly might be the one that gets sacrificed this year, and they may have to look for another Brett Connolly storyline next year. He gets over 20 goals this year, played fantastic, and he's earned the right to some more money, and he's probably going to find that somewhere else. Devontae Smith-Pelly, of course, middle of the season, he was pitched down to the minors, cleared waivers, and all that wonderful stuff. And these playoffs, he came up and played a bit, but I don't think he's in their plans. Brooks Orpik, I think he's done. I don't know. He's 38, so, I mean, if he wants to come back, it'll just be for the Capitals, but I think he's probably done. Restricted free agents, Burakovsky, who's at $3 million. He's got arbitration rates. You look at that cap hits for next year. Burakovsky, $3 million. So you'd have to qualify him. You have to pay a certain amount of that to qualify him. I don't know. I don't know that Burakovsky's going to be on Washington next year because I think they want to save some cap space, and I don't know that Burakovsky's done enough to warrant spending more than that $3 million or at that $3 million for another year or two. Yashkin, his arbitration rates, he's not going to get a big raise if he sticks around. Vrana's going to be interesting. Jacob Vrana's interesting because they're not in cap hell, but if they want to pay for potential. So this is where I differ from other people where I see guys get this huge contract and I'm like, he hasn't done anything yet. They're like, well, they're paying for his potential. That's potentially horrible for your cap a couple years down the road. Where you're looking at a guy and you go, well, I gave him $4.5 million. He's got 3 goals and he's sitting in the American League, but I was paying for potential. Yeah, that's the scary thing. Now, I'm not saying Vrana's going to end up in the AHL or anything. That's not going to happen. But it'll be very interesting to see what they do this summer with Vrana, how much Vrana's worth, and what they do with Burakovsky. Because next summer, that's the big one. Chandler Stevenson has arbitration rates, and Christian Juice has arbitration rates. They'll both likely come back, not at big raises either. Ilya Samsonov's out there as a prospect who's going to push for a job, I think, this fall. I know his numbers in the American League were poor to start the season. He seemed to get better as the season went along. And so Phoenix Copley, who had a pretty darn good season as well, is signed long-term. Well, another 2 years after this one. I don't know. Whatever they decide to do with their goaltending, they're good. Washington is fantastic at developing goaltenders. I could go over a nice long list of goaltenders that Washington's developed and then farmed out somewhere else because they have too many goaltenders. Alexander Alexiev, be interesting to see if they try to get him into the lineup as soon as possible. We'll see, right? Lucas Johansson, 21 years of age. I think he'll get a shot at a roster spot in the fall. And Jonas Siegenthaler, I think will get a shot at a full-time roster spot as well. And again, with the Capitals and with other teams that I've talked about in this series, having guys on entry-level contracts can make all the difference in the world between being able to live with the cap and live within it and not. They're in pretty good shape. I think that Todd Reirden's going to be on a short leash come this fall, but if they get off to a good start in the regular season, I don't see any reason to think that they would make a change. If they get off to a poor start, you just never know. The pressure to win in Washington is going to be pretty heavy because you've got Ovechkin in his 30s, still scoring 50 goals a year, seemingly in his sleep. You've got Backstrom, also in his 30s. And you've got a team that kind of feels like maybe they've already peaked. Maybe the regular season peak was 3 years ago, and maybe the postseason peak was last year. and maybe they're kind of on their way down. So what the general manager has to decide is, when he's looking at this picture, is, do I try to keep this team as a contender? Do I do everything I can to prop them up? Or do I maybe strip things down just a little, get a couple more prospects in there with an eye to the future? So there's some interesting decisions to be made this summer. And again, I'm not saying cap hell. Maybe cap heck on some level. A little bit less extreme. But we will see what they do. They've been pretty good at freeing themselves up from bad cap situations over the last couple of years. I don't see any reason they can't this year. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And I guess the question is, have the Caps peaked? Or can they not suck for the second time in 3 years? And I'm just using the terminology that Ovechkin used. I don't think they've been a team that sucks for a long time. It's just when you keep getting knocked out in the first or second round, people will tend to treat you that way. At least now they've got that Stanley Cup. So that'll silence the critics until next year. Yeah. If they lose in the first or second round next year, the critics will all be back just as loud as before. That's kind of the way it works. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.